Well, first, as the only British person on this panel, perhaps you would allow me to say in passing that I think that many of the things which Professor Friedman says about the British experience in the last 30 years are a gross distortion and a gross travesty of what's actually gone on in Britain, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to come back in the course of the discussion.
Very much.
But I think that your question brings up what is, to me, the absolutely central confusion in the exposition that we saw in the film. And I'm a great admirer of Professor Friedman. I've studied him, I've listened to him, I've debated with him, and always before I found him at least clear, even when he's been wrong. Today I found him grossly confused, and in this specific and all-important respect. Is he telling us that absolute equality is a mistaken objective, in which case I think he's tilting at windmills, he is attacking a straw man. There is almost nobody on the other side of that argument. Or is he saying that any concern at all by societies and governments with reducing inequality is mistaken, is not only in conflict with freedom and efficiency and other human objectives, but is absolutely wrong, in which case I think he's talking absolute nonsense. His arguments tend to support the first rather platitudinous proposition that absolute equality, still less absolute sameness, is a foolish and exaggerated objective. His arguments do not at all support the second claim, that it is wrong to concern oneself with distribution of income and wealth and reducing inequality at all.
What I mean by equality is the concept I would like to see pursued is a concept that Tom Sowell just discussed of equality of opportunity. The concept that increasingly is being taken up by the intellectual community is equality of results. Now, nobody, and I agree with Peter, nobody means identity.
Well, nobody, you said so on the film. You said so yourself. Absolutely.
Nobody.
All that argument about we produce one human prototype and put him in the museum,
right.
That's exactly what you said.
Nobody, when you press him, will say he means identity. And yet, if I take the logic of their argument, almost all the logic of such arguments proceeds as if identity were achievable, as if there were some way in which you could measure individual equality. As, again, as Tom Sowell was saying, you have to ask, in what direction are they moving? See, the fundamental distinction between you and me on this, I believe, is a very different one. I think there's all the difference in the world between a social or governmental system in which 90% of the people tax themselves to help 10% who are in distress, and a system in which 80% of the people in the middle try to tax the 10% on the top in order to help the 10% at the bottom.
You're dodging the fundamental issue which was brought up by Tom Sowell. Are you saying to us that the only form of equality that one's entitled as a society, in your view, to be concerned with is equality of opportunity, and any concern with inequalities of result is illegitimate, that any inequality, however great, provided it's thrown up by a free market system and not by a caste system or a feudal system of which kind you disapprove, that any concern with that is wrong? Are you saying that or aren't you saying it? Because it's all important.
Concern with whom? By whom?
Concern by the society.
The society doesn't have concerns.
It has governments, it has laws, it has parliaments.
Only people have concerns. People do certain things through government. And I'm not going to talk about society having values. Society doesn't have values. People have
values. All right.
Values.
Is it wrong for people to be concerned about inequality?
It is not wrong for individuals in their private capacity to be concerned. Anybody who is really concerned can do something about it on his own.
Is it wrong for them to elect governments which do something about it? You yourself
It's not wrong for them to elect
You yourself have supported a negative income tax, which is a way of doing something about inequality.
It's not wrong for us to do something through government about distress. Yeah. But there's a fundamental distinction between relieving distress and doing something about inequality. I would say that in this world, the greatest source of inequality has been special privileges granted by government. That government, you may talk a great deal, there may be a lot of talk about how we're going to eliminate inequality. But if you go back to your case of Britain, is there any doubt that one of the effects of governmental intervention in Britain has been to create new opportunities for special classes? That the way to get wealthy in a society that supposedly is aiming at equality, that the way to get wealthy is to get a special government permit to to get foreign exchange, or to import goods, or to, in this country, to set up a television station. Those are the ways in which you get inequality.
Well, I think, Milton, you grossly misrepresent the British experience, and here perhaps I might make the points. First of all, the burden of taxation in Britain is lower, and has been for many years, than in any other of the countries of the European community, the overall burden of taxation. Secondly, you will immediately come back and say, but the marginal rates of personal taxation have been extremely high. Perfectly true, but not as high as they were in the United States until the early 1960s. It's interesting to note in passing that when the United States reduced its 90% maximum personal rate to 50%, the rate of economic growth in the United States, and I'm not suggesting cause and effect, fell from the previously very low rate of 2.5% a year to about 0.4% in the period since, so that any notion that there is an absolutely one-for-one relationship between the degree of personal taxation and efficiency is wholly mythical.
Well, thirdly, I tell you, what you can do with statistics.
Well, you ought to look at the facts. It's easy to make glib remarks about statistics. Look at the facts. Look at the fact that in Britain, over the last 30 years, during which period, according to you, Britain has been crushed by egalitarianism, whereas the United States has been soaring away in a glorious state of liberty, the rate of economic growth in Britain has been faster than that in the United States. How do you explain that?
First of all, I have to look at what the figures mean in Britain. I have to look at the way in which...
First you ought to look at them. And then...
I have looked at them.
Back in my chairman's role, can we leave the statistical debate? Fascinating, I'm sure it is. I want to make the point, Milton. It seemed to me, and I am not British, I'm Canadian, having lived a great deal in the UK, it seems to me that you really have most unfairly used the UK as a whipping boy in the last third of your film.
Question, what is he saying? And it's very important we should know what he's saying. It seems to me that he should accept the fact that nobody is arguing for absolute equality and disregarding all other social and human objectives. He should accept that it is perfectly reasonable, widely endorsed and perfectly logical for people to say, amongst other social political objectives, reducing inequality is a perfectly sensible one, and that in those cases where you can show that you can get a big gain in equality for only a very small loss in freedom or only a very small loss in efficiency, that is a sensible and legitimate thing to do, and if it involves government action by, for example, income tax or negative income tax, that is a perfectly proper and sensible thing to do. And if he's denying that, then I still say he's given us no moral or ethical arguments to explain why he is denying that perfectly proper concern with equality along with freedom, efficiency and other human objectives.
The answer to that is that you can only serve one God. And that it's stating that there are many, many of these objectives is evading the fundamental issue. In addition to that, as an empirical matter, the attempts to achieve equality along your lines, to lessen inequality, have generally backfired. They have generally reduced freedom without, in fact...
In Germany?
Yes.
In Japan?
Yes.
In France?
Take the Japanese case, which is a marvelous case. Not now, but 1867, after the Meiji Restoration.
Right now. Hell with 1867.
Well, the reason for taking it then is because you had a far greater measure of free enterprise then than you have had more recently.
That's my point.
In almost all cases, the way to promote equality is the same as a way to promote, as an outcome, is the same as a way to promote freedom. If you promote freedom, if you remove arbitrary obstacles, you open the way for people to use their resources, you will end up, in my opinion, and I think the empirical evidence is overwhelmingly on this side, you will end up with both more freedom, more prosperity, and more equality.
You're a closet egalitarian, really, then. You
not.
Support the objective.
I would like to... There's an enormous difference between liking to see a result and being in favor of a particular method of achieving that result.
Milton is still equivocating as to whether he is attacking the idea of absolute equality, in which case his examples of the Labour Party, his examples of some sections of the Democratic Party just don't stand up, or whether he is maintaining the proposition that any concern to reduce inequalities of result, of outcome, not of opportunity, but of result, is wrong. Now, if he is saying the second, it seems to me that arguments that he's made don't tend to show that result. It is perfect... Well, just let me finish, because we let you finish.
Okay.
It is perfectly reasonable for a society to say, or for people in a society to say, and together through their political process to express the thought, that there are many objectives that society has. Efficiency is one, prosperity is one, freedom is perhaps the most important of all, that concern about equality, or at least about reducing inequality, is another. And that we should ask ourselves the question, are all the inequalities that we face, the gross inequalities described in Dickens, the gross inequalities which you yourself reported in India, the gross inequalities which you yourself said in the film were offensive and were unfair, are all of these justified by the criteria of freedom and efficiency, or are some of them unnecessary? In other words, we take the principle that there should only be such inequality as is necessary and justified by one of the other criteria of a society. Now, if you're willing to say that, then you're not in disagreement with anybody. If you're denying that, you've made no arguments to support what you're saying.